very good. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our Appian journey. We deployed the product in a dev and test environment and established a small production footprint in January of 2015. So we're about 15, 16 months into our journey. And we had several problems we were trying to solve. So anybody that's read anything about Sprint realizes that we have a lot of debt. We don't have a whole lot of money. And we got some big operational expense problems that we're trying to solve. And we're trying to take a lot of cost out of the business. But while we're doing that, we want to be a disruptor in the marketplace. And there's a lot of capabilities that we want to deliver, and we need to do it faster. So our challenge was, how do you deliver more at a faster, lower cost? And in order to do that, you can't throw away your existing infrastructure. So I'm going to talk to you about some ugly problems that we have in our infrastructure because we're a 30-year-old company. And so we have a lot of the baggage that 30-year-old companies have. And we've been through some mergers and acquisitions and divestitures, and that creates its own level of complexity. But in order to do that, we couldn't just do a greenfield solution. So we have to keep and leverage what's working today and what's working well. And then we needed to also be able to do that by lowering our cost structure. So we had to keep what was good. We had to lower our costs. And we had to, a lot of the ways we're doing that is we're taking out a lot of licensed software. And we have two agenda items for the licensed software. One is it's costly. But the second reason from our chairman is that, hey, if you're buying what everybody else is buying to solve the same set of problems, you're not going to be innovative, you're not going to be disruptive, you're not going to be doing anything different because you're using what everybody else is using, including your competition. So we need to build more, we need to buy less, we need to do it fast. We can't do it without we have to introduce cost and we have to leverage what we have. And if you'll notice, if you listen to any of our commercials in the process, somebody asked me if I was going to bring a chainsaw to this presentation today. I hadn't actually thought about that, but I thought it was a really good idea. Too bad I didn't have it at the beginning. And that is, we need to deliver our capabilities at half the cost, in half the time, or twice as fast. And the overall IT infrastructure, when we're done, has to be smaller. So we're going to take 50% of cost out of the infrastructure. We're going to continue to deliver new and innovative capabilities. We're going to do that very fast at very low cost without buying anything. That's the problem. What I'm going to talk to you about today is the 4 areas where we've deployed Appian and some of the lessons that we've learned along the way, some of which were obvious lessons. Hopefully everybody's learned those. And then we have some not so obvious things that we've discovered along the path. And by the way, Clay and I didn't synchronize our presentations, but it's going to actually work out really well. So he actually set the stage for me. So the first area, and this is an eye chart by definition, and I promise not to go through all the little squares on the chart. But we started out as a wireline company. And so in that, we started that out 30 years ago, and we did what most companies did in telecom, is you started with something, and then you build on more, and you build on more, and you build on more, and you build on more. And every time you went to do something that looked like it was somewhat new, you created a new application, right? So all of a sudden, we woke up last year, and we said, we've got 400 applications in an aging infrastructure, both from a network perspective and an IT perspective. We need to modernize our wireline portfolio to sell to enterprise and small business customers. And in a part of modernizing it, we need to jettison a lot of the old technology. We need to be able to adopt the new technology. We need to do it relatively fast. And we need to reduce the cost structure associated with it. So there's about 400 applications in that infrastructure. And if you look around, when we started to draw the diagram, one of my architects that's actually here today, that works on my team, is actually tried to draw the diagram of how all the systems interconnected with one another. And there was no application that would let us draw that diagram so that it was actually legible, right? You could just do it as ink blots, and it would work pretty well. And we had things like 50 or 60 order management, order capture applications. So the business process was navigating your way, rekeying data multiple times, tracking through multiple order management systems, and then every once in a while we get the idea that we clean all that up and we'd add another order management system, and it just resolved, it didn't really resolve anything, it just added another layer of stuff to navigate our way through. So this re-architecture justified our Appian purchase. So when we bought Appian, we went looking for a solution to the problem. We used Appian to solve this particular problem, and it's why we justified it. And what we were able to do and have been able to do, we've deployed the first major workflow release associated with this in March. We're struggling a little bit with getting it launched because some of the integration with the back office components, but we expect to launch it this weekend. And out of that, we will retire 50% of the portfolio. So we'll go from 400 to less than 200. We will have eliminated all of our mainframes. So in modernizing the Wireline portfolio, we actually were able to get rid of all the mainframes. We were able to close 2 data centers, and we're able to remove somewhere in the neighborhood of $17 million in OpEx annually as a result of that. And what we did was we had systems of record, or what I like to refer to as purpose-built applications that were performing a discrete function really well. So we wanted to keep those. They happened to luckily be on the mid-range, not on the mainframe, so that was really good news. And then we used Appian to do the connection points between all of those systems of record. And that way, we didn't actually, what we changed was we created a process where there was none. So one of the interesting dynamics of that is there was no real business process in this place. There was a whole set of steps, but I wouldn't equate that to any kind of business process, right? So what we told the user community when we went through this process is we said, we're going to get rid of all this old stuff. We're going to give you workflow, and we're going to put business process modeling and management in place. And when you're done, you'll have a single process that you can navigate all the way through. And the interesting part about that was we actually named the application. We didn't call it Appian. We named the application, but the user community refers to it as BPM. And the way I caught on to that one day is I happened to be listening to a testing call, and I'm hearing things like, well, we're entering the order in BPM. Okay. And BPM broke, or it didn't work. It's like, I'm not sure how BPM can break, but it didn't work, right? But the user community, the transformation that occurred there is they moved from non-existent process, no real streamlined mechanisms, to something to them, which was now a managed business process. And it takes the user community all the way from the point that a customer is engaged on purchasing this service, they're qualified, they've actually getting quotes, working through the contract process, and then ultimately getting through order capture, installation of the order, provisioning of it, turn up, and moving forward. In the Wireline space, that is a 30 to 45-day process if things run really, really well. And so that was the start of what we did, and it was the justification for actually bringing in the product and using it. So I'll go on to the next area, which is around network densification. So we have a lot of macro cell sites, not to take people into the annals of how wireless works, but we have a lot of macro cell sites. But if you look at how radio signals work, they work in circles. And our spectrum positions is across the air. And so what you end up with is scenarios where the circle isn't broad enough, or you're on the edges of the circle and you don't have good coverage. And so our solution to that from a Sprint perspective is to leave our macro cells in place, but start to deploy microcells, small cells that act as repeaters and transformers that actually enable better coverage and much better use of our network spectrum that's available to us. And so there's 3 component parts. I promise not to drag you too deep into how the network works. But there's three component parts to wireless services. One is the radio network. That's what they call RAN, which is actually the spectrum that you hear. And that's actually how you pick up your signal on your wireless phone. I bet nobody here is without a wireless phone. I'm sure all of you have one in some way, shape, form, or another. Ultimately, you have to take that signal that's acquired in your device, and you have to get it to what we call backhaul, which means it's getting back to a wired component to actually traverse across into our core network, which is actually manipulating the call, doing the connections between the endpoints, and actually making sure that your services work, whether that be a data session that you're trying to access the internet from, or a voice session or a text message, whatever it is that you're attempting to do on the network. So what we needed to be able to do, and what we want to do, because we can do it at a lower cost, is we want to deploy small cells so that that RAN, that initial signal coverage, is denser and more complete, and you have more access to it regardless of where you are. So what we did with Appian is we had to do two things along the Appian side of it. So one of them is we had to create a mechanism that allowed us to go to all the places we wanted to put this equipment and understand how that site was configured, where is it physically located, did we have permission to put equipment there, how heavy is the equipment, how's it configured, how much power does it generate, does it interfere with anything else that's in that area. You can't just go put equipment on somebody's property and say, okay, I'm just going to stick this here, and I'm going to monitor it and surveil it, and I'm going to run trucks over there, and I can just put it there. You have to have permission. You just can't slap equipment anywhere. So it's actually a relatively complex process to figure out what kind of equipment we needed in what geographic location, and then making sure that that particular spot was something that was going to work well on the network, and we had permission to use it. So that process was being run off of Excel spreadsheets and a QuickBase application. So you think about deploying 70,000 cells. So Excel spreadsheets work well for about 1,000. But when you're getting to 70,000 and you're going through the lengthy process of getting permission, making sure you have the right to use, determining if you have any costs associated with that, we couldn't manage the amount of simultaneous deployment that we were trying to do nationwide off of Excel spreadsheets. People pass them around, they change stuff in them, they're not approved. And so what we did was we used Appian to do two things. The first thing we used Appian to do was at least let's do the site surveys and make sure that we understand where we need to actually have equipment, what that equipment looks like, what it's connecting into across the network. And then the second thing we did was we said, okay, of all the available sites available to us in which we can actually deploy this equipment, how do we approve them? How do we make sure it's the right site? And how do we get the right equipment in there? So we built an NGN application to do that in order to enable the site survey selection and the approval, and to make sure it's hardened and make sure we can surveil it. And the first week that we turned it up, because there had been some questions about scalability and how fast we could move, the client community that was actually working through this process kick-started 9,000 processes instantaneously. It dropped it in, and all of a sudden, we're trying to deploy across 70,000. We had 9,000 in flight, and the funnel needs to stay that heavy in order to get the equipment deployed in the time frame that we're trying to deploy it. And so this is just a basic, another diagram that kind of shows the Appian components. So you can see the things that are in fuchsia, I guess is that color. It shows that we actually have Appian running in the RAN, the radio network. We have it running across our backhaul, and then we have also it running across our core. A site selection to turn up process can be several months just because of approvals, regulations. And then this is a pictorial of individuals in Jackson, Tennessee. You can see that they're using a combination of devices. They're using a mobile device, they're using a laptop, and they're also using a tablet. And we needed to be able to put this process in all of those because they're out in hard hats, walking from site to site, driving from site to site, and they needed items that were quick and easy that they could instantaneously load the information into, and then they could make decisions from. They also needed to be sure that they were actually installing the right equipment at the right site. Now, that sounds simple until you're trying to do 9,000 site deployments simultaneously at the same time. Pretty easy to get the wrong equipment to the wrong place. So the next set of things I'm going to talk to you about is where we've had probably our greatest lessons learned. One would have thought that we learned a lot through the Wireline application component of it, and we did. We've learned some things about not getting wrapped around the axle if things don't actually turn out exactly the way you thought they were going to, and allowing the process to unfold itself. But in the sales space is probably where we learned the most. So we consider direct to you a sales application. So the way that one got started, Clay made it sound like actually a whole lot more elegant than it really happened, so especially my part in the role. So we turn up Appian in January, got it on the floor, we're starting to experiment with it, and we're doing this big Wireline project. That's a big waterfall project. It's got 200 applications that are being retired and hundreds of people that are engaged in figuring out how that's going to work, and lots of phases, lots of testing, but lots of time to experiment and figure our way through it. And while that's going on, the CEO in February of the same year, so deployed in January, in late February says, I want to start a home service. I want to start delivering phones to people's houses and set them up there, and I want mobile reps, and I want to be able to go ahead and do that. And, you know, we're all like, okay, well, it's an interesting idea. We're not sure how it's going to work, but, you know, cool idea, and don't want to invest a lot in it, want to be able to figure out how to trial it. And so I'm going along. I'm like, okay, well, all right, we can figure that out. I put a solution architect on that, and we'll figure out how to do that. And he says, and I want it in 2 weeks. And I'm like, 2 weeks? Wait, 2 weeks from when? Right? Can we do 2 weeks from next quarter, or 2 weeks? Who does stuff in 2 weeks? What do you mean, 2 weeks? So the CIO at the time, he says, well, Kathy, Appian was your big idea. So you said that if we brought Appian in, we could take things that used to take months and they take weeks, and we'd take weeks and then turn them into days. You got 14 days. What do you need? Come on. That's what you said. I said, yeah, but we were going to do it on this Wireline project and this water flow, and we're not in that phase yet. We're talking about it now. Hey, it was your big idea. You go figure it out. So I said, gee, this is going to be a lot of fun. So went back and said, okay, how would we do something in 2 weeks? And in the process of working through that, we said, well, the thing to actually take somebody that actually knows how to turn up phone service and have them turn it up in a house instead of turning it up in a store is not that hard. I mean, we had the applications running on tablets. We had some things that would work like that because we had already done some pop-up stores. And so we had the ability to run some of our software on tablets. So the hardest part for us was figuring out how we were going to take our back-end inventory management systems and activation systems and deal with the fact that somebody was actually going to pay for the device and the service in front of actually turning it on. And so we were going to have to work around how some of our current workflow worked. It's like, okay, well, we could do that. So we short-circuited some things, and then we used the good old standby for scheduling called Excel. And we worked out a deal with the company that was actually doing the traveling technicians and said, okay, since you're doing the traveling technicians, can we send you an Excel spreadsheet if we only turn it up in a couple markets? And will you send reps out with an Excel spreadsheet on what they need to do that day? And we did. It was kind of duct taped and baling wire together, but we got it working. And we got enough of it working that we're currently officially in 30 markets, but our definition of a market has gotten much broader. So Atlanta is not just Atlanta, it's all of southern Alabama. So we found that we can deploy the technicians across a broader range of territories. And ultimately, we had to get off of Excel spreadsheets and figure out how to get them lists of customers and orders in a more elegant manner. But the rest of the components of Direct to You that we built initially are still there. And basically, because we could use a lot of our infrastructure, we just had to steer it in a little different direction. But the other component that we started then using in parallel with the Wireline effort was our sales front end. So the pictorial here is we got a bunch of different colored front ends, and we have that many front ends. We have a unique front end for every single market channel. It's like, okay, wow, that's a lot of front ends. And so we started working through, we need to have more unified experience. We need to get to a unified front end. We need to have a consistent sales experience. And primarily, we need to be able to launch more rapidly new ideas across all of our channels. So if we've got a new marketing plan, 50% off, we've got 50% going in a lot of places. 50% off, we need to be able to do that consistently. We need to be able to do it quickly. If there's a new idea, we need to be able to deploy it in days, not in months or weeks. And so started through the process of saying, okay, well, what's this unified front end need to look like? And I started getting information, not exactly requirements, but information like, well, it needs to be one, and it needs to be fast, and it needs to be simple, and it needs to be intuitive. And I'm like, guys, what am I going to do with that? I mean, I'm an IT person. I'm an old assembler COBOL programmer, right? I mean, come on, right? Those are adjectives. They're not requirements. You're going to have to help me out here. So we lived for a while on that, so I said, okay, here's what we'll do, because I don't like standing around and admiring problems. So I said, here's what we'll do. We'll just pick a front end, and we'll replicate it in Appian. And then once we get that one done, then we'll do another one, and that's how we'll get there. We'll do it over time. And the problem we ran into with that is we were rolling out market changes so fast that the front end we built in Appian started always being behind, right? We can never get it launched because it can never catch up, right? Some other piece of functionality got introduced or some new kind of capability got introduced, we couldn't keep up with it. And it occurred to me at a point then that I wasn't really solving the problem because I was attacking the face, not the core problem that we were having, that was making it complex and long in duration and not easy to use and difficult to maintain. So we went back to the middle and we said, what are we really having trouble with? Well, what we're really having trouble with is that the decision-making process for picking the right plan and applying that to the right customer scenario at the right point in time in the right channel is not being driven by data. It's being driven by a salesperson who's trying to, in their head, scroll through a list of activities and figure out the one that fits. And that's making it slow and complicated and confusing and resulting in customer dissatisfaction because what the sales rep told them isn't what they ended up with on their bill. So with Embed and with that idea in mind, you don't have to execute your Appian process in an Appian face. So it wasn't a UI problem. It wasn't a user interface problem. It was a data problem. And when we went after solving the data problem, we found that the user interface didn't matter. It didn't matter if it was like a calculator, right? It doesn't matter what the form factor of the calculator is. You just need the same kind of answer when you add 2 + 2. And we needed to do the same thing with our sales front ends. So we needed to build in the middle layer, which we have an extensive middleware, the capability of delivering the correct answer regardless of the face that the front end had. And so you don't go after the outer circle, we went after the inner one. And so that's the component part that we're working on right now. And we're actually building a component part of what people would think of as a product catalog, but it's actually got a lot of personal information in it. And we're using data to actually drive that decision-making process so that the end salesperson is focused on sales. They're not focused on remembering every price plan. And by the way, we have 21,000 of them. And trying to figure out which one applies to what customer. And the last piece that we're using Appian is what we call our end-user constructed tools. So we have the same challenges with things like QuickBase and Lotus Notes that was talked about earlier. And we have approximately, in our place, 150 independent sales tools, sales and care tools, that were constructed over a long period of time using tools that allowed citizen developers, I hadn't heard that term until today, build their own applications, which means that it's a very fragmented, confusing, poorly documented, not well understood set of tools out there. And we're not trying to remove that capability from those individuals to give them that flexibility. But what we are trying to do is make sure that they're all necessary, that they make sense. We don't want to be paying license costs for them. We want them used consistently. And so our next mission is to actually remove that licensing cost from our infrastructure, as well as provide a more consistent and unified experience for those tools and narrowing the number of them. We don't really need 150 tools in this space. It's not that many functions. It's just over the course of time, somebody said I need a new report, so they used a new thing to do it. So in summation, kind of let you know what we found out in our journey and some of the key lessons that we learned. So one is you can use Appian successfully on any kind of project. It can be waterfall, it can be water scrumfall, which a lot of people don't like, but it is a reality. You're in a big company, you got big stuff like mainframes, you're gonna have to do some water scrumfall. That's just all there is to it. But you do have to use Agile development methods, and you have to be prepared to, just because you're using it on a major initiative in a way, you cannot get married to your initial design. So one of the things in the Wireline project is we thought we were going to use Appian to do a trouble ticketing system. And as we worked on it, we spent more of our time up in the front-end sales processes was where we were spending our time. And ultimately came to the conclusion that we actually had a purpose-built ticketing application that solved those kinds of tickets successfully. We had a whole network operations team that was used to using it. It's what they used to surveil and manage their managed services product. And it didn't make sense to go rip that out and put something else in just because it was Appian and we thought that would make sense in the beginning. So you have to have that Agile construct that says, what I thought I was going to do isn't necessarily what I need to do, and I need to be willing to adjust and not get freaked out if we have to adjust stuff over time. BPM applied to existing application infrastructure can deliver greater value faster than developing new applications. We've found that over and over and over again. You just have to get the process working, and you have to do it in a way that makes sense, but you absolutely can leverage your existing code base. You have to pick pieces that work. You can't pick broken pieces, right? You can't glue the glass bottle back together. But pieces that work, leave them alone. If they work well, they're well understood, they don't generate much errors. There's tons of development work to do. Don't go messing with stuff that works. And then we're using all forms of Appian. We're using automated, we're using transactional, we're using case management, we're using embed, and we've moved from one to the other without a whole bunch of turmoil. So in the sales space, we moved from front end work step-by-step, transactional stale, to embed, and we didn't have any rework. And we're reusing the services that were constructed across the enterprise because we integrated 60 of them. And they all have value, and we've documented them in libraries, and we understand that they're there, and we're picking out and we're using them in ways that weren't initially intended, but work perfectly well. Geo-positioning is one of them, where we had a need on the sales side to understand physically where people were located. We were able to reuse that service on the network side, and also in our some of our other applications in care without any problems. So you don't have to get freaked out if you built something and you're not quite certain that you're going to use it or it isn't working out, right? Leave it there. You'll come back to it. You'll find a use for it. The key to short delivery cycles is well-documented web services that are standardized. So in my architectural team is a manager group that doesn't do anything but supervise web service construction. And it's a governance model, and we've had to go through some culture change to get everybody comfortable with it. But if you need access to data in the application infrastructure, you have to go through my organization. Not because we're trying to be difficult about it, but because it reduces errors, it increases reuse, It makes it standard, and we know what we're doing, and when there's problems and faults, we know where they are, and we can easily find them. Utilization of Appian enablement resources results in greater scale than professional services. So we've used professional services. We've had good success with them. It gave us a great foundation to start with. But if you want to scale, you have to get the people in your organization, no matter how old they are, that applies to me, to get comfortable with how to do specific projects, how to use it, and you'll get great scale out of it, but you got to get them started. If you don't get them started, you'll continue that reliance on, oh my gosh, there's a critical deadline, and I can't get it, and I'm unsure, and I don't, and you know, pretty soon you're using somebody else, right? So bite the bullet, find people that are innovative, find people that are fearless, find people that are good, and they'll pick up the mantra and they'll figure it out. They may have stubbed their toe a few times, but they'll figure it out. And then we have established a center of excellence. We have regular structured sessions. We have learn by doing, reuse, and it does aid us in keeping and creating momentum. So because it's there, it's a place for somebody that's trying to do something that's unsure to go to and commiserate and learn by and get support from everybody else. And that's my last slide. I think I'm a minute over, but I think I also stand in the way of the next presenter. So thank you for your time and attention today. I really appreciate it.